with staff?
It's probably been a number of years because you guys are used to seeing Jim DeGrood, but for those of you that haven't heard, he had retired last November. So you're now meeting the replacement team. So, but all of us worked with Jim for a number of years, well familiar with everything. It's a pleasure now to get to be working with all of you and get to sit in on all this. I'm Rick Ellis. Worked closely with Jim in this capacity and then was with the county DOT for about 15 years prior.
James Tao, I'm the RTA budget coordinator.
And then you knew Jules Morrison from before. She's our carryover to keep us all in line. So it's a nice chance to get to meet all of you. For those of you getting to work with before, it's good to see you again. And as we go along, and then after the meeting, we can meet and talk any further that you want and kind of get to know one another. So thank you for the time.
Thank you, Rick. Moving on to the approval of the meeting summary. Everyone had a chance to review it. And is there a motion?
Motion.
Any discussion? All right, the motion carries.
Did you want to call for a vote, ma'am?
Oh, I'm sorry. A vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Election of officers, I will turn it over to Ms. Maslin.
Hi, everyone. The nominating committee met a couple weeks ago and discussed opportunities and ideas for our new slate of officers, and we feel that we have good leadership in who we have, and as the RTA moves forward on what the next iteration should be, that having consistent leadership is really important. So we present a slate of officers of the chair of Chris Albright, vice chair of Fred Macaroni.
Nakarati. It's okay.
I always want to say macaroni with an it.
It's close. It's close.
And the secretary, Charlene Robinson.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the not,
So moved.
Second.
any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, now I can turn it over to Chris.
Thank you for your leadership. Last 2 years?
Yeah, about to.
2 years? Yeah. Thank you very much. We'll move right on to item number 4, financial update. James, take us way there.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. As I mentioned, my name is James Tao. I am the RTA budget coordinator and will be providing a brief overview of the fiscal year 2023-2024 RTA budget. The RTA budget process is similar to previous years, beginning with revenue estimates guided primarily by the 5-year Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP as it's more commonly known, and by intergovernmental agreements, whether existing or pending. The FY 2023-24 budget was approved by the RTA board at the May 25th meeting. Budget adoption is required prior to the beginning of the fiscal year, which began on July 1st. Unexpended funds from fiscal year 23 are not included in the recommended budget. Those funds will be carried forward when rollover adjustments have been completed in coordination with jurisdictional partners. At the time of budget adoption, the first 10 months of excise tax collections were strong, with an 8.4% increase from the same period a year earlier. The University of Arizona Eller Economic Business and Research Center has forecasted revenues to be at just over $107 million in its 2021 forecast for fiscal year 23. The Eller revenue forecast was slightly over $119 million for fiscal year 24. Our revenue recommendation was just over I believe I lost my place. I'm sorry. Unexpended funds from fiscal year 23 are not included in the recommended budget. Those funds will be carried forward when rollover adjustments have been completed in coordination with jurisdictional partners. At the time of budget adoption, the first 10 months of excise tax collections were strong, with an 8.4% increase from the same period a year earlier. The University of Arizona Eller Economic Business and Research Center has forecasted revenues to be at just over $107 million in its 2021 forecast for fiscal year 23. The Eller revenue forecast was slightly over $119 million for fiscal year 24. Our revenue recommendation was just over $119 million, with other revenues of about $9 million, bringing our total revenue budget to $128,282,000. RTA funds budgeted for a particular fiscal year generally match the TIP, although there can be temporary exceptions as budget approval and TIP amendments may be on slightly different timetables. We are expecting approximately $25 million of RTA excise tax to be expended on the roadway element, nearly $6 million for the environmental and economic vitality element, and just over $29 million of RTA funding for the transit element. There will be debt service payments of $29,745,000, which include principal and interest. The RTA's administrative expenses are estimated to be $1,722,700, with project funding, debt service, and administration. Our anticipated expenditure budget is $91,848,700. Looking at the overall budget, our estimated revenues are $128,282,000, with expenditures expected to reach nearly $92 million. With revenues in excess of expenditures, we expect a budget contingency of $36.4 million. RTA board policy requires that a 10% reserve of excise tax is maintained, reducing the unrestricted budget contingency by just under $12 million. This leaves us with an estimated budget contingency of just over $24.5 million for fiscal year 24. The RTA board at its discretion can allocate up to $24,526,300 in RTA eligible supplemental funding in fiscal year 24. Carry forward or rollover activities will begin once the final check run for fiscal year 23 has been completed. As we continue to be consistent with the recommendations of the RTA audit, staff will coordinate regularly with lead agencies for updated cost and cash flow estimates. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Mr. Quigley.
Good afternoon. Just quickly, can you tell me, going over the estimates from Eller in 2020 for 2022, they estimated what, and we actually came in what? What was the estimate from Eller for FY 2022, and what did it actually come in? And then I'm going to ask the same question, I mean, as we move into 23.
So I don't have those exact numbers, Mr. Chair. I don't have those exact numbers with me. I can say over the last few years, our revenues have come in higher than expected. This year was slightly lower at 8.4%. I believe last year was about 10%, as well as the year prior to that. I can provide exact figures to you though later this afternoon. I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, my question is, and again, the budget's been approved and everything, but I'm just kind of wondering, from my municipal background, you kind of look at what other people are telling you, and then you try to budget as close as you can. I'm just trying to see how close they're coming and and how the board is taking that. Okay.
So, you know, this year is not an exception of that. We will have a surplus or contingency following the fiscal year based upon expenditures that generally are the budget's higher than what the expenditures actually have come in as over the last few years. And so those dollars will roll until the projects actually, you know, move along and are completed. So we've been in it's a positive position to be in, where we are the local economy is doing well enough that our revenues are actually higher than expected. At some point, of course, those will be expended, and that's part of the rollover process. It takes those dollars into the next fiscal year for those projects. But I can say the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen revenues higher than projected by about 10%.
And then I have one more follow-up question to that. You said there was 1.47 million for administrative expense.
Yes.
What portion of the overall PAG budget is that? I'm assuming that there's a split of what PAG does and what the RTA does. How is that calculated?
Well, I wouldn't have that information. My focus is solely on the RTA budget. That would have to be something I have to provide to you later. But I can get that information.
Okay, so can you tell me what the PAG, do you know what the PAG budget is?
I don't have the PAG budget.
Roughly, I mean, $3 million?
Oh,
Mr. Chair, if I may.
I was gonna say, Paul, if you're on and want to tackle it, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy, yes. So the state statutes allows up to 1% of the RTA revenue to be allocated to PAG for operation of the RTA. So that's 1% of the RTA revenue. And then in comparison with PAG's budget usually hovers around $14 million a year. But again, most of those activities are not eligible for RTA expenses. So those are separate expenses guided by federal and state law.
Thank you, wherever you are.
Thank you.
He has spoken.
Any other questions? All right, moving on to the project funding updates. Mr.
Okay, well, we'll segue then directly from the overall budget activity into now the funding updates. So I'm going to swipe this from you. Okay, this is going to deal with what we're specifically how it applies to some of the more active projects we've got, as well as some recent efforts we did this past spring. So first and foremost, we had a couple of things we needed to deal with at the beginning of the year. Number one is we had some additional regional funds in the form of STBG, which is our federal funds, stands for Surface Transportation Block Grant. And then we also had an allocation of regional HERF funds that were available that need to be programmed for fiscal years, excuse me, fiscal years 24, 25, and 26. On top of that, we also wanted to do, as part of our annual spring review, where do we stand with obligations by the jurisdictions that are using federal funds? That's a key requirement, is there are key timelines that have to be associated with that, and can obligation authority be met so that we can ensure those projects move forward and the funds aren't lost to the region. So that was the primary effort we had earlier this year. PAG staff engaged the Transportation Improvement Program TIP committee as well. That's the main working committee that oversees this activity. So as a result of those discussions, the key following efforts came out of that. First and foremost is the federal funds for RTA Project 15, which is the Union Pacific Railroad at Grant Road. That's the widening to 6 lanes as we go underneath that rail crossing. That was converted from STBG into regional HERF. So it addressed that timeline constraint that project was operating under. So it simplified that and gave better flexibility as the city of Tucson now works to administer that project with all the activity surrounding that area. The funding amount for RTA number 19, 22nd Street, specifically phase 2, which is the big railroad bridge over the rail yard there between Keno and Tucson. That was increased. We were able to put some of the additional funds to the region onto that project. As you recall, that project had won a RAISE grant, thus federalizing it. So the addition of federal money now continue with a good match and aligned with those efforts and activities. And so we were able to program up to a much closer align with the cost estimate at that time. Because of the nature of that project, they're still under development with a lot of activities, but we wanted to make sure that we were putting that supplemental funding towards that use, towards that project. So that was another advantage. In addition, the federal funds for number 23, Valencia from I-19 to Alvernon, those were also converted to then regional HERF. So once again, taking off those prescriptive timelines that are associated with those and the obligation requirements that must be met, basically allows a little bit more flexibility in how that project's administered. And then lastly, regional HERF were converted to STBG for number 20. This is the Barraza Aviation Parkway that is being done in conjunction with ADOT. Because of that project already being federalized and going through a NEPA process, that one can then utilize the federal funds and meet the timeline requirements associated with that. So basically, it's a matter of lining up the requirements, the flexibility of the funding options with the best suitable projects so that it's a much more compatible flow in there. So those were the efforts and activities that took place, funding those projects specifically, and result in those actions and advantages to those 4 projects. I know that's a quick down and dirty, and that took place over several meetings earlier this year, but I can answer any questions on that before I move into the next segment associated with this update.
Madam Chairman, I have a question, Rick.
Go for it.
On your first slide, you indicated a couple sources of revenue. Yeah, thanks. The regional HERF, does that represent an amount of funding that comes directly to PAG? Or is it the total summary cost of all the jurisdictions like the cities and towns?
No, this is the amount that comes to the PAG region that is then available for allocation to the projects.
That's in state law.
And yeah, that's an allocation that comes out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
All right.
Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 6.
Actually, there's a second part to this that I want to hit upon. I was going to say, that's why this was kind of a 2-part one, and James and I talked and kind of figured out how to best break this up because it's all under the same thing of project activity, but one of them was a programming effort. The other is just a reminder on the deferred project. So these 4 projects, no action was taken on those because the board has received approval. I'm sorry, the board has taken action on this. And so these were projects that had significant scope changes. They were identified in conjunction with the jurisdictions. So we've tried to identify those projects where there were either major scope changes that need to be accounted for, and thus the belief that the voters deserve another round of input on that, or the financial aspects of it needed to be addressed as well. So the board took action on that last year. And as a recap, these are the critical ones now that are being deferred, and that's the specific phrase, into RTA next. So it's First Avenue from Orange Grove to Ina Road. It was originally envisioned as a 4-lane roadway, but as the county has evaluated the traffic projections, the growth, and the current operations, they analyzed this one that could be done with a 3-lane section and then add the necessary bike, pedestrian, and drainage improvements in there. So this has been identified for period 1. That's been a board commitment that these are going to be the priority projects coming out of the next plan. So this is already being listed in the RTA next plan, and it's one of the projects deferred. But that's the scope of the improvements that will be happening up there. The next one is RTA number 35, Houghton Road. This is from Broadway Boulevard to Tanque Verde. So this is the very north end that was originally supposed to be a combination of probably 4 and 6 lanes all the way up to the Tanque Verde intersection. Working closely with the city on that one, they've identified that the 4-lane section can be continued between Broadway all the way up through the Speedway intersection. And from there, it can be a combination of a 2-lane, 3-lane with the associated bike and pedestrian improvements to ensure that it will get up to the Tanque Verde intersection while still addressing the capacity and the operational needs. So really, really downscopes that, makes a much cleaner, neater project and is more in line with the budgetary constraints. The other 2 projects are Silver Bell Road from Camino del Cerro to Ina Road. So I've been working from the south up to the north, and I'll get to that when we talk about the project updates in the next section. But this final phase of Silver Bell has been identified as a 4-lane divided roadway, including all the companion pieces of bike, pedestrian, and drainage. And so this would also be in period 1, and this would take care of the last 4 miles of that roadway. And then the last one is 22nd Street, I-10 to Keno Parkway. This is actually the last piece in there. And the city, same thing, reevaluating the function, the needs, the impacts, how are the current operations, and identified that a 4-lane roadway would work with the appropriate bike ped, crossing features, all those necessary amenities, and then the grade separation of the railroad tracks for that spur line that goes down to Nogales. So all these projects have been identified by the board as deferral to RTA next, but have been committed to as period 1 implementation projects. And with that, Mr. Chair, that's that entire section. I can answer any questions on that or the other one.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
So were these projects deferred in order for everything to fit in the budget, or were they deferred just because they're not necessary?
Combination of two things. So there were two efforts. As you saw through James's presentation, as we're going through the budget discussions and looking ahead for the overall, what's going to be remaining. We call it either cost to complete or gap analysis. And that was an exercise that the board had requested that we go through and do to say, how does our money stack up against what we have to deliver? Combined with, there was the feeling and there was the knowledge and the awareness that there are projects, you know what, the scope changes are conducive, they're suitable, they're good candidates for it, and the public should have another crack at weighing in on that. So the combination of those things came back and said those were the qualities and characteristics that the jurisdictions identified, and the board accepted and said those are good qualities to defer them to the future plan.
So does that mean that if we had the money, we probably would be doing them?
I would say that would probably be a realistic assessment. The board is still fully committed, as all are the jurisdictions as well. And so that combination of things, but that scope change issue would probably then have to discussed at the board level.
I have one more question.
Sue?
That would be, are you James?
Yes.
Oh, right, I got it right. I'm so happy. Has the increased interest rate affected us and how much extra money we have, or was all the deals with fixed rates before?
Well, my understanding, and that would be probably something to ask our finance director, but my understanding is that the difference is only maybe a few $100,000, which of course is a large amount of money, but relatively speaking, it's small. So it doesn't really impact what's available for the projects.
Thank you.
Yes.
Chair, Rick, I know that you were talking about these projects getting deferred into RTA next. What happens if there is no RTA next?
I'm in Vegas at that point in time, so I can't say for sure. No, I think we've kind of pondered different what if scenarios. And I think it's such a wide range of possibilities that we haven't really gone into, hey, what if this scenario popped up? What if this scenario popped up? So I can't give you an answer on that, unfortunately, because I think it's such a wide range of possibilities. Farhad, did you want to jump in on that too?
Sure, Mr. Chair, if I may. Good question. So as part of our discussions with the board, we are obviously committed to completing these projects, but as Rick mentioned earlier, because of the scope changes, we want to have the opportunity to have that conversation with the community. If RTA Next does not pass, obviously we have other major policy issues to discuss, but the board has committed that they will complete the RTA 1 projects. And by completing, I want to make sure everybody understands, and then you all have been involved all along, and you understand that RTA's commitment to the projects is to start a phase of the project, and the later phases do not have to be completed by 2026. So that's, I want to make sure everybody's clear on that. There is some confusion about that. So especially projects that have phases like Houghton Road, 22nd Street, Silver Bell, all those projects have already begun. They've had phases that have been completed. So we have met the intent of the law to start those projects. Completing the final phases can go beyond 2026, and the board has committed that they will do that, potentially using other regional funds.
Does that answer your question and give you all the information you were looking for?
One more question in the back.
For projects,
We have one more question in the back first. Go ahead.
when you were talking and saying that the voters would have another chance, does that mean when you put the project into next,
Yes.
it has to be re-voted on?
Yes, that's correct. So that's been a decision by the board, as those will be placed on the ballot with the new projects and identified there as here's a project scope description, much like what I provided there. That's what we're carrying. And then the associated cost estimate.
Thank you.
Yep.
Chairman, these 4 projects, are they in a sequence or priorities, or they just fall into place as how they were listed?
I'll defer to Rick for his.
That's just the listing on them. So no, the only priority that's been identified is the board is, as Farhad said, committed to delivering these and ensuring that those move forward as a carryover from the current plan. And they will be period 1 projects. So instead of saying, well, those could be period 3 or 4, no, because those have been identified, because they've already been pulled out of the first plan and deferred to the second one, they need to be addressed right out of the gate. No longer delayed, no longer waited.
Thank you.
Farhad's got a.
Oh, Farhad, go ahead.
No, I think you got it. That's the key point there, that they are prioritized, and they will be in the first 5 year of the new plan.
Next.
So PAG next, is it 20-year period?
Yes, the legislation requires a 20-year period. So that's the length of the plan in terms of tax collection. As Farhad mentioned, implementation can extend past that, as long as we've met the ballot requirement to start construction on that particular project.
And if, you keep on talking about moving things into period 1,
Mhm.
typically, how many periods are there?
So there's 4 5-year periods. So the current plan is based on period 1 is a 5-year block of time, then period 2, period 3, period 4. So the current plan, we're in period 4 now. So as Farhad said, we've already met ballot compliance on the majority of it, and the period 4 projects will be underway by the lead jurisdictions to ensure that compliance, start construction by the time frame associated. So because those 4 deferred projects move into the new plan, once approved by voters, they're in period 1. They have a 5-year period once that plan goes into effect to ensure that they meet compliance by starting construction in that time frame.
And it's at the midterm election, November 26th.
An election date has not been yet set by the board.
So it's not necessarily coinciding with the federal election.
That's correct.
Questions, any other, Mr. Quigley?
Thank you. In our next, I guess our next meeting, perhaps November, I guess, is this next time we'll get together. It would be interesting to see kind of where we are with the current projects. In other words, as a forwarded materials to us prior to the meeting, looking at kind of RTA current, the funding shortfalls or the funding commitments made on the remaining projects. And again, the reason why I'm asking for it in November is because, again, we're going to see the bills get finalized at the end of, for 22, and we'll know where the dollars are. I'm concerned a little bit about kind of where we are from a construction price aspect of things, given the fact that there's not a lot of contractors are really pressured right now to get jobs done. I think we've seen the supply chain improve a little bit, but I'm just wondering the overall impact. And if we could see that in November, kind of how we've, what's been allocated for 23 and kind of how we finished up on 22.
And we'd certainly make note of that. To answer that question now, you heard James talk about it. One of the key items that came out of the RTA audit was an annual check-in on that very topic. Where do we stand? And so each year, this time of year, we reach out to the jurisdictions on all the active projects. Where are you at? What do you got? What's your latest and greatest estimates? Here's what we carried before. Are you going up and higher? Are you coming down? And what additional funding sources have you identified? Grants, allocations, anything else that can be brought to bear on that? So the original gap analysis or cost to complete that was performed identified that we can fund the rest of the plan and commit to that, minus those 4 projects that have been deferred for the reasons we talked about. But we do an annual checkup on that to make sure that the health of the situation is still accurate. So we check that logic each year along the way to say, can we still do what we said we were going to do when the original plan was identified?
And we could see that in November?
We brought that to I think Jim had presented on this last year, but we can work to see if we can do an update on that.
I don't, Chairman, I think this would be an important thing for us to look at.
I agree.
And this would be prior to their audit.
I like the thought of, looking how 22 closed out and then kind of where we're at year to date with 23.
Right.
Prior to the audit, just seeing where we've done that in the past and seeing some of those financial analysis of where it's sitting in comparison to revenue as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fair enough.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Mogimi has a comment.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add to that. So actually, the next item on the agenda gets into that discussion. We have gone through the 5-year TIP process, and that has identified projects that are ready to move forward and be fully funded. So I think you'll get a taste of that under the next agenda item, and then, of course, we can bring the rest of it at the next meeting.
No, thank you, Farhad.
One more question.
Yeah, the information he was wanting, isn't it on the website, the library?
It
Or all
probably is.
previous presentations?
I was gonna say, I know that it's there from various updates to the boards, that particularly this information, Jim covered it in a lot of detail in previous board meetings last year to generate the impetus for the approval of those projects to go into RTA next. So, updating it, yeah, the basis of all that and where we're at today is available, and we can bring updated information.
I just want to respond. What I'm looking for is how the bills get paid in July. In other words, we're gonna, there's going to be a carry forward of projects. Okay, so let's see where we are with that, because they don't know right now, because the jurisdictions haven't closed their books. And so that's what I'm looking for, is that kind of final number in 23. So it's not, I don't think, available right now, although the project cost estimate might be there, but I'll bet you there might be an update to those estimates sooner rather than later.
So
Yeah,
we,
Mr. Chair, if I may, so Andy, what you're talking about is our annual fiscal year closeout. We do that annually, and we provide all that information to our audit team. So it's an independent audit, and we'll typically have that information by November, December timeframe. And I know exactly what you're looking for. We'll provide that at that time.
Thank you.
thanks, Farhad.
Thank you.
Any other questions on item number 5? All right, we'll move on to number 6.
Okay. Perfect segue into now, these are the updates. I am going to try and stay high clip. We can go into the weeds if you want, or as best as we can amongst the three of us, because we've committed to meeting with the jurisdictions on a regular basis to make sure we're accurately conveying the latest and greatest information and making sure we're passing that on to all of you as well. So I'm going to be high clip. We can come back and answer any questions you've got at the tail end. So I'm going to try to do this in the roadway element and the way the plan's laid out. So the working in active construction, then in design, then working through some of the other highlighted elements. So right now, the efforts we've got in construction and consist of Sunset Road and Downtown Links. Sunset Road is being constructed as part of the I-10 Gap project. That's the common referral to that. It goes from basically Ina Road down to Ruthroff, and it adds that 4th lane to match in what was built both north and south of those with those interchange projects. So they're out underway with the overall effort, and the Sunset portion is later in the overall project schedule, and it'll connect everything together at that point in time. Construction on that is targeted for the end of 2025, although you see a lot of those activities going on out there as we speak. Downtown Links project, the east half of this from basically Stone Avenue, give or take, over to Broadway, that's been completed. That's open to the traveling public, and it's been used and is working very effectively. So you may or may not have a chance to drive on that, bike on that, walk on that, and you can see how that looks all completed. The remaining portion that's going to go over to the west to St. Mary's and connect into that previously constructed portion, still fully under construction. You see all the work activities out there and all the equipment. A lot of ongoing efforts, particularly with the railroad on that. Those of you that have heard those updates or are familiar with what happens in industry know that that's a big challenge in every situation. So those efforts are going, and right now they're on track to be done probably next summer or fall is what they're looking at, when they'll be substantially complete and then bring the whole pieces together for that project.
It hooks into St. Mary's?
Pardon me?
It's planned to hook into St. Mary's?
Right, they had completed that portion several years ago. So they've kind of done they do the far western portion, and then they connect into what's been completed with that.
So there's like a middle portion.
They're working, yeah, the middle portion.
The tracks that has to be completed.
The last bit is getting underneath the railroad tracks, and then they'll tie into the improvements that were made. Okay.
And Madam Chairwoman, Rick, what is meant by that Stone Avenue to Broadway? Those are perpendicular routes. I don't understand on the Downtown Links.
So because, yeah, graphically, downtown links kind of goes at a skew. So where Stone Avenue, just to the east of there is where downtown, the Links project peels off and goes down, follows the railroad alignment. So if this is Stone Avenue, this is east, you come east on 6th Street and then you peel off and come down and follow that and connect into what's designated as Broadway, where then Barraza Aviation actually takes off and goes further to the east.
Thank you.
This is consistent with city, how they've talked about it, described it, so we want to be respectful of that recommendation. Broadway, the remaining activities out there with the curbing, drainage, landscaping, all the typical buttoning up activities, signing, utility adjustment. This is all the little stuff you do at the tail end as you button up a project and then move it to substantial completion. So those are the things they're working on out there. The bulk of it looks, tastes, feels done. You can drive it. You do see occasional traffic control, or you may see occasional work going on out there. But overall, it's operating. It is useful. And then you'll just see these remaining contract closeout activities. And they're anticipating finishing that up later this summer, and they'll be substantially complete on that effort. So that's wrapping up very nicely. Now, the project's in design. So Tangerine Road, the designation on this is phase 2A. So it's working from I-10. As you recall, the portion from basically Dove Mountain all the way to the east to First Avenue has been completed. And so this portion now is working from the railroad tracks or the I-10 interchange, roughly about 2 miles, give or take. They've identified a utility corridor location that lines up nice and neat and is alignment with the funding on that. Design right-of-way activities are fully underway. They're going full speed on this. They expect to begin initial grading activities, stockpiling, site prep, and then assistance with the utility relocation later this fall. And then the big heavy-duty production work on that is going to start after the new year, after the utilities have gotten out of the way. So you'll start seeing that likely break free after the new year starts. Next one up is Silver Bell. This is a project being led by the city. Final phase, this project goes from Gorey to Camino del Cerro. Okay, so it's the continuation of the southern piece that the city had started several years ago. The design plans are undergoing their review and evaluation as we speak. So they're working with the utility providers, particularly Tucson Water, going through the last cycles with the Department of Transportation staff and its associated stakeholders. The first phase of the cultural activities out there, you've probably heard a lot of reference to this, where there's been an initial cultural resource data investigation and recovery effort. That's been complete. Now they're waiting on the construction, and they'll be doing that side by side with the contractor to make sure all the monitoring, recovery, and all those activities are done in full compliance with the State Historic Preservation Act. And then the advertisement for that, once all the plan activities and all the final approvals are done, then the project will be advertised. We're anticipating that's probably late summer, possibly into the fall when that project will come. One thing that oftentimes people ask about is, how's that going to work with the overlap on the I-10 with construction going on? They're actually separated by the Ruth Roth or Camino del Cerro Road. The improvements at the interchange now allowed this, where you can jog over either side. So it's not exactly parallel segments. It's offset and staggered. This has long been planned for, long known it was coming, and that overlap was always going to be managed by both ADOT as well as the city. Next project up is the Union Pacific Railroad. This is the underpass at Grant Road. We're going to widen it out to 6 lanes. As I'd mentioned during, or as part of the efforts and activities that we had done with the TIP committee earlier this year, we were able to replace or reallocate the federal funds to regional HERP, allows for a little bit more flexibility. And these have had ongoing discussions now with that casino site that's going to be going on out there, and make sure that those efforts are properly coordinated and integrated. So those are ongoing conversations that the city is having with the Pasco Yaqui tribe. We expect as those conversations progress, they'll restart design activities, and we're anticipating that's going to be late summer or this fall. Grant Road, keeping on the Grant Road alignment on this, but independent or a second project on that. This is what's been designated a phase 3 and 4. 1 and 2 worked from the west end in for a certain portion. Now they're moving down to the east end. And so Grant Road, or what we designate 3 and 4, 2-mile section out there, design activities have been finalized. The right-of-way activities have been finalized to the point where we have a full access to the construction site. The last of the utility activities is now being wrapped up. including the removal of the poles once TEP and all the tenants have come off of that. And we anticipate that project to go to advertisement for construction here in the upcoming weeks, not months. So that one's going to be coming here shortly. Grant Road 5 and 6. This one, they're heading for the 90% milestone. That's going to be later this fall. And so this is the middle 2-mile segment that's in between those bookends. And we'll continue to watch how that one progresses and then see how timelines line up for that, for what future activities will be coming on that. But right now they're in the middle of the big design efforts and working towards that 90% milestone. Next one up now, shifting gears and going down to 22nd Street. This is the big bridge crossing that goes over the big rail yard and connects Keno, which was previously constructed several years ago, to the Tucson Boulevard. So they had hired a construction manager at risk. They are using a construction manager at risk delivery approach. They've hired a team. They've assembled them. Been working the last, year and a half, I think now, on all the value engineering, final design activities, key elements that can be incorporated to help simplify the project, reduce risk, and make it an overall better job. All those efforts are ongoing, including the coordination with the railroad, Arizona Department of Transportation, and the outreach with the public. There have been several meetings the city of Tucson has held with them. So all those activities are going on. We've also been pursuing and working with the Federal Highway Administration on the RAISE grant, as well as the federal allocation that we had put into that. And we anticipate construction activities to fire up sometime later this summer as all those efforts get buttoned up and those activities are completed. Next project up that's just getting started and underway is the Irvington Road. And this is being done in conjunction to the project actually identifies from the Santa Cruz over to east of I-10. And it was a fairly broad definition of scope improvements geared primarily at the bike and pedestrian connectivity that needed to take place. A great opportunity aligned where we were able to combine this, as you've heard and seen as we talked with Ruth Roth, Ina, the GAP project, similar mentality. ADOT's in there, they're going to redo the interchange and reconfigure that to improve capacity and operations. It made sense to combine this project in with their efforts. One shot, one project, do the construction improvements to benefit both projects, and then you're in and out and done. So they've just gotten underway with those design activities. A lot of the early on upfront things with survey, traffic analysis, all the various technical efforts that are underway, and that project will get going. The anticipated timeframe is to start construction late next year somewhere. So that's the timeframe ADOT's on with this effort. Valencia from Kolb to Houghton. This is the far east end of Valencia. So this corridor's had a lot of activity across County City and a variety of other projects. The design, right-of-way, and utility activities are all underway. The plans are essentially done. Design has been completed. Right-of-way efforts are fully underway on that and acquiring parcels from both state lands, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, as well as then the private and individual acquisitions. All that activity is underway. Utility relocation has started in advance of that. And once that reaches a suitable level of completion, we'll plan on advertising that project. Right now, that's targeted for later this fall, but pending suitable completion of those other efforts is when that will be advertised by the city. And then lastly, the Houghton Road. This is what's referred to, I believe, as segment 7. And this goes from Irvington all the way up to 22nd Street. Design activities are complete on this one. What really bogged this one down is there's very, very extensive utility relocation needed. Not the simple little pick it up and move it over a little bit, but full-blown 18-month on behalf of Tucson Electric Power, Southwest Gas. They call them CenturyLink still. Thank you, Lumen. So it's not a simple, easy one. And on top of that, we need to get the right of way so that we'll have the space available for them to move into. So all those efforts and activities are underway. The main part of that utility work is going to be starting or is starting now as we speak. And then we'll be carrying and continuing into next year. And so then the construction is anticipated for late 24 or early 25. Same thing. Once it reaches a suitable level of completion, won't interfere with the mainline construction project, then that effort will get going underway as well. And as you heard, the segments 8 from basically Broadway up to Tanque Verde, that's been deferred to RTA next. So this is the last of the active Houghton projects. So shifting into a couple of the other categoricals that have got a lot of activity on that we're working closely with the jurisdictions on. For category 41, which is all your greenways, pathways, bikeways, and sidewalk. They have a variety. I wasn't going to list every project here because there's probably 10, 15 that we meet with the jurisdictions on, watch, track, and monitor. But the bulk of these efforts all have design activities going on right now, and they anticipate being ready to happen and go to construction in 2024. So that's kind of how we're carrying it and connotating it, is that throughout that time frame is when we expect the bulk of those to be able to go out. Combinations of bike boulevards, bike lanes, pathway projects, wide variety that all deal with category 41. But 2024 is when we anticipate a lot of that to really get up and running and fired up.
Can I get a question? Pertaining to this greenway, do they project finishing it off up at 36 all the way up to Euclid?
I'll have to follow up on that on
Because on the other side of the railroad on 36th Street.
36th Street.
It belongs to the city, but on the other side of the street it belongs to the city of South Tucson. But it's not, the greenway is not completed yet, so.
Unfortunately, that one, it's bundled all together. I'd have to look into and I'll have to follow up on that. I just can't remember off the top of my head. So like I said, there's usually about 10 to 15 of these we track, and I didn't bring the details specifically, so we'll follow up on them.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you. The other major category it's getting a lot of activity is the wildlife linkage section. So on this one, we've got two major project efforts. State Route 77. You remember several years ago, the big wildlife overcrossing bridge and then the big arch culvert that was built underneath as part of ADOT's widening project. Those were implemented and constructed at that same time as part of that project. We've had the companion piece, which was the fencing, because the wildlife linkage crossings, they're greatly enhanced when the fencing component comes along to funnel them properly. So there was fencing done with the project, and then we had a secondary piece that we did as a separate project with Oro Valley doing the lead, and they just recently wrapped that one up. So the majority of our SR 77, we've got a small segment left we're dealing with on Black Wash, but for the most part, we've been able to complete the vision of what was identified on that. And then on SR 86, design activities are underway. Same thing. This was a multi-phase improvements. ADOT was out there with a set of safety improvements, and we were able to upgrade several culverts by just adding RTA dollars to the active ADOT project. This was done several years ago, and then the fencing component was brought in. There was always envisioned that there would be a follow-on project to either come back and look at overcrossings or potentially undercrossings, where some of the design discussions are going now. And so we're working with the project team and the TO Nation on that, who's the lead jurisdiction that sponsored the project, even though ADOT is the one doing the administration. That's the TO Nation was the proponent of the project. So we're having design discussions as we speak, and we've been meeting with the TO Nation communities as recently as this last Sunday. So we're still very early on that. So construction's kind of tentatively targeted for 2025, but we'll see how those continued discussions go on. And with that, I can answer any final questions or anything else that we've covered in the project updates components.
Help me a little bit with the Grant Road.
Pardon me?
With Grant Road,
Grant Road, okay.
just what are the ends of 3 and 4 and 5 and 6?
Oh, good God.
3 and 4 is between what streets? 5 and 6 is between what streets?
I would say I usually Alvernon to Swan is how I would describe 3 and 4. And then I believe it's Park Mountain to Alvernon is the middle chunk.
Which is to the west, right?
Yeah, so they completed up through Stone and then actually built the intersection up to right around the mountain area, roughly. So you kind of, the way I think of it is they did the western 2 miles, going down to do the eastern 2 miles, come back to get the middle 2 miles.
And 86 is the road that Aho turns.
Aho Highway, correct. Yeah, this is out by the Kit Peak area. So out in that area, that was identified many years ago through statewide efforts, through the Wildlife Arena, Game and Fish, many other folks that are involved in all that. So that was a major connectivity effort that was identified.
Sheriff Conti.
I have a question regarding the downtown linkage.
Yep.
When the project is complete, that section that's between Broadway and it ends at Sixth right now, that'll eventually go through. Will the speed limit change at all, like increase? Because it's a 35, not that anybody does it, but 35 miles an hour.
I think it's 30.
30, it is 30, sorry.
I think the intent is to keep the same speed out there. I don't know 100%, but I have not heard him talk about turning it or upgrading or allowing for a higher speed. And on many of the other roadway projects we watch, they usually try to keep the same speed in operations.
And will they work on the traffic light connections too? There seems to be a little off, right?
Yes, I was gonna say a lot of that as the corridor comes online and they get to bring in that other piece, all that will be then connected fully and integrated.
Any other questions? None.
Mr. Chair, that concludes my report and everything else we've got on this agenda items on the table for today.
We're adjourned.
31 minutes. Yeah, 51 minutes. I put.
Nobody